Hello everyone, happy chapter 10 of Addison Cook and the Incan Treasure. Okay, the last we left, the Addison's group was right outside of the cathedral, and Rhaegar had just driven off with the aunt and the uncle in a limousine, and he had left the kids with Zuboff. All right, let's see how it goes. Chapter 10, Zuboff. Addison turned to face Zuboff. "Addison Cook," he said, offering his business card. "Pleasure to meet you. I admire a man of talent." Addison felt if he could get conversation going, cooler minds might prevail. Zuboff stared down at Addison with the speculative look of an undeterred tiger. Molly looked up at the giant man. "How come they call you Teeth?" Zuboff grinned, revealing teeth filed down into points. "Ah," said Molly. Raj stared up at Zuboff in amazement. He could not help but feel impressed. "How did your teeth get that way?" Zuboff turned his predatory gaze to Raj. When he spoke, his accent was even heavier than Rhaegar's. "I was locked up in Zinsk Gulag in Siberia, sharing bread and water with deadliest criminals in Russia. I needed weapon to stay alive. I stole iron file from work mine, but had no metal to sharpen into shank, not even spoon or fork. So I file my teeth, and now I always have a weapon." Zuboff smiled again and clicked his teeth. Addison respected a man of resource. He was pleased to have Zuboff opening up about himself. The thing was to get on Zuboff's good side. Perhaps Addison could begin softening him up. "We're just 7th graders. You're not really going to hurt us, right? You could just let us walk away and never see us again. Less work for you, less hassle for us. Everybody wins. Deal?" Zuboff leveled his slow gaze on Addison. The icy glare did little to inspire Addison with confidence. "There were children in Zinsk." Zuboff eyed Molly. "Even women and girls. None were shown mercy." "Why work for Rhaegar?" asked Addison, looking for an angle. "What's in it for you?" "Rhaegar freed all of us from Zinsk. We owe him our lives." "Will he share the Incan treasure with you?" "Every day I am free is a treasure I owe Rhaegar." "So I'll take that as a no," said Addison. Zuboff reached out one gigantic paw and grabbed Addison by his necktie. He lifted Addison off the ground. Addison's feet dangled helplessly, pedaling in the air. He realized, to his immense regret, that he had completely failed to get on Zuboff's good side. With his free hand, Zuboff flicked out his butterfly knife, the steel flashing brightly in the moonlight. "You're going to have 10 less fingers by the time I'm finished." 10 fewer fingers, Addison corrected. Zuboff began squeezing Addison's windpipe. "Forget the fingers. I start with your tongue." Addison twisted and kicked, but he could not shake free of Zuboff's iron grip. Zuboff pressed the knife against Addison's cheek. For once, Addison shut his mouth tight. Eddie and Raj were paralyzed with shock. It was Molly who acted. Her first instinct was to run, but to her amazement, she found herself sprinting toward Zuboff rather than away. She took a running start, wound up, and kicked Zuboff hard in the kneecap. Her soccer cleats struck home with a satisfying crunch. Zuboff barked with rage. He hurled Addison to the ground and wheeled to face Molly, whipping and spinning his butterfly knife. Raj snapped out of his daze and snapped into action. He had spent countless hours of his life daydreaming about being in a knife fight. He wasn't about to let this golden opportunity pass him by. He stepped forward. "I've got this." "Raj, no," Addison croaked, clutching his bruised throat. "It's okay, everyone. I've read a survival book with a chapter on knife fights." Raj shed his jacket and wrapped it around his arm as a shield. He squared off with Zuboff, who welcomed the challenge with a wolf-like grin. Addison watched in horror. "Raj, are you sure? I don't want to sound negative, but you're like 5'2" and weigh 90 pounds. So the smart money's on Zuboff. The human body is capable of incredible feats when its survival is threatened, said Raj. Raj and Zuboff slowly circled each other, Raj watching Zuboff's every movement. Zuboff swiping, Raj dodged. Zuboff slashed, Raj rolled. Zuboff jabbed like a fencer, and Raj somehow scrambled past him. "Enough of this," said Molly with annoyance, and with all her strength she stomped on Zuboff's foot with her soccer cleats. There was an audible snap. Zuboff howled in pain and surprise. In the same split second, Molly swatted Zuboff's hand. His butterfly knife clattered to the ground. Addison quickly scooped up the knife and pocketed it. He watched Zuboff sink to the ground, clutching his broken toe. "Zuboff, sorry we got off on the wrong foot." Raj stared at Molly in wonder, and then at Addison. "You cooks are amazing." Zuboff gritted his sharpened teeth and swallowed down his pain. He tested his weight on his foot and rose back to his full height. Eddie hopped nervously back and forth. "What do we do now?" Addison narrowed his eyes, weighing his options. "Run," he suggested, and with that, they turned and bolted. It was at that exact moment, several blocks away, Guadalupe was running for her life. Policia was waving their batons, chasing her through the night market. All Guadalupe had done was relieve a street vendor of a single churro. Well, maybe a handful of single churros. The point, in Guadalupe's opinion, was that the street vendor possessed altogether too many churros, whereas Guadalupe possessed far too few. In her hunger, she had done him a favor of rebalancing this equation. It seemed like a keen idea at the time. The policia surrounded Guadalupe. She frantically crammed an entire churro into her mouth before they could take it from her. The lieutenant stepped forward. He glared down his long nose at her. "Stealing again," he said in his Bogota dialect. "This is your third strike, Guadalupe. I'm going to lock you up for a long time." To emphasize this point, he took a long time saying the word long. Guadalupe kissed the toasted sugar from her fingers and swallowed down the last delicious churro. "It was worth it," she said. "I've been saving a spot for you in jail." The policia closed in on her on all sides. Guadalupe saw no way out. Sighing, she lifted her wrists for the handcuffs. Her wrists were already covered in bracelets. 2 more wouldn't hurt. Guadalupe believed in fate. Whatever will be, will be. Life, it seems to Guadalupe, was often nothing more than a series of random coincidences, and it was not for her to stand in the way of chance. As it happened, in fact, she did not have to stand at all. At that precise instant, Addison, Molly, Eddie, and Raj barreled around the corner, pursued by a limping Zuboff. They collided with Guadalupe and the policia like 5 bowling balls striking 7 bowling pins. Everyone was knocked off their feet entirely. Addison sprawled on the muddy ground. He looked up from the general tangle of limbs to find himself face to face with Guadalupe. "You!" he growled. "You!" she gasped. "Addison, come on!" shouted Molly, grabbing his arm and yanking him to his feet. Guadalupe, Addison, Molly, Eddie, and Raj sprinted through the market, pursued by Zuboff and the policia. Guadalupe hot-footed across the bazaar, her feet barely touching the ground. Addison tore after her like a cheetah chasing the world's last gazelle. "Why are we following her?" cried Molly, pumping her fists for speed. "We can't trust her." "She knows this town better than we do, and she's not interested in getting pinched by the police." Molly took Addison's point. They loped after Guadalupe, the policia fast at their heels. The market was as noisy and colorful as a circus. Salted fish and skinned venison hung from shop rafters. Barefoot children rolled spices onto smoked mutton. Agüitis and pacas. Barking vendors shilled bananas, oranges, and mangoes. Wrinkled Quechuan women hunkered over cooking fires, smoke-curing beef and drinking white rum. "Left!" Molly cried, watching Guadalupe skitter down the last side alley. "Stop following me!" Guadalupe called over her shoulder. "You'll lead the policia right to me." "You owe us," shouted Addison. "We just saved you from being arrested." "Not yet, you haven't." Guadalupe dodged as the police nearly tackled her from a side lane. She whipped open the back door of a house, surprising a family over dinner. "Just passing through," she called, sprinting through their dining room. Addison and his team chased Guadalupe through the living room and out the front door, followed by a dozen policia and a rather furious Zuboff. Guadalupe hurtled between tin-walled shacks of the shantytown. "You keeping up?" Addison's group gasped for breath. They darted past dark-eyed men hunched over dice games, past bandits rolling corn husk cigarettes with shreds of rope tobacco, past tattooed desperados cheering over 10-peso cockfights. "See if you can follow this," cried Guadalupe. Just as Addison could feel the policia's breath on the back of his neck, Guadalupe sprinted along an overpass and leapt the guardrail, jumping off the bridge. With no time to consider a better idea, Addison and his team dove over the bridge after her. For a few seconds, Addison plummeted through the air. This gave him plenty of time to reflect on the wisdom of his actions. They might fall 10 feet or 100 feet. They might land in a raging river or a rocky ravine. Addison had simply not taken the time to check before leaping off of the bridge. It was like Aunt Delia always told him. He had to learn easy lessons the hard way. Whatever happened, Addison decided it was probably going to hurt. A split second later, the group landed in what could only be described as a giant pile of tires. It didn't hurt at all. Addison bounced a few times and came to a stop. Guadalupe brushed herself off and looked at Addison with begrudging respect. "Not bad for a tourist," she said. The policia high on the overpass weren't so inclined to take the jump. They circled to find another way down. Zuboff, gritting his pointed teeth, faded silently into the darkened alleyway. "It's Guadalupe, right?" Addison ventured a guess. "Yes. I like your style," he said. Guadalupe looked Addison up and down, appraising him. "I guess you did help me escape." She climbed from the heap of tires and turned towards a warren of wooden huts. "Try to keep up." She led the group through a maze of alleys. They climbed a storm drain and crossed a row of rooftops overlooking the town. Spanish tiles creaked under their feet, followed by stretches of flat white stucco where they moved as quietly and quickly as cat burglars. At last, they reached a rooftop with a sprawling view of the Andes Mountains. "This is where I sleep," Guadalupe announced. Addison scanned the village below. He watched the policia running to and fro, blowing whistles and searching the surrounding streets. "Is it safe?" asked Molly. "The policia are like cattle," Guadalupe sniffed. "They never look up." "Either way," said Addison, "I think this is a good time for us to take our leave of Olvidados." Addison and his team sat behind a parapet, catching their breath. Guadalupe set to work on a churro she had hidden in her pocket. "Well, where do we go now?" asked Molly. Addison opened his pocket notebook and examined the sketch he made of Atahualpa's second key. "Eddie, have a whack at translating this." Eddie tilted the notebook to read it good in the moonlight. "Across the mighty Amazon, through the jungle of the headhunters, follow the footstep of the Incas in a castle at the end of the world. The key is hidden closest to the gods." "It sounds better in Spanish," commented Guadalupe, reading over Eddie's shoulder. "That's what I've been telling them," Eddie agreed. "Wait a second. This doesn't concern you." He hid the notebook from her. Guadalupe smiled at Eddie, sizing him up. She took him for an easy mark. "How'd you learn Spanish so well?" "Guatemalan nanny," Eddie said guardingly. "Your reading is excellent." "Thanks," said Eddie, warming to Guadalupe. "I also speak Chinese from my parents." "Cool. Any other languages?" Guadalupe sidled closer. Eddie lifted one shoulder and dropped it. Some Turkish." "You had a Turkish nanny too?" "Nope. My apartment's right over restaurant Anatolia." So Guadalupe looked at him quizzically. "So my parents both work," Eddie explained. "So sometimes after school I hang out in the restaurant kitchen to do my homework. I've learned Turkish from the cooks. It's harika. That's Turkish for great." Sorry if anybody speaks Turkish. I'm not good at Turkish. Guadalupe nodded. "So what's this about ancient Incan keys?" To Eddie's amazement, the notebook was suddenly in her hand. She held the sketch of the Incan key up to the moonlight, eyeing the writing. "We're on a treasure hunt," said Molly. "Bacán," said Guadalupe, smiling at Eddie. "That's Colombian for cool." "Guadalupe doesn't need to know what we're doing," Addison whispered. "It's none of her business," said Raj, snatching the notebook from Guadalupe and handing it back to Eddie. Guadalupe shrugged and returned her attention to the churro. She made a convincing show of ignoring their conversation. Eddie studied the Incan clue. "Across the mighty Amazon, through the jungles of the headhunters, follow the steps of the Incas in a castle at the end of the world." "Across the Amazon," Molly piped up. "That gives us a starting point." Addison shook his head. "From Olvidados, we can cross the Amazon going south or going west." "Well, if we knew where the jungle of headhunters were, that would narrow it down some," Raj put in. He was rather hoping to encounter some headhunters. Eddie examined the key again. "Follow the footsteps of the Inca in a castle at the end of the world." Addison snapped his fingers. "I think I have an idea where we're going. Give or take 50 miles. "Where?" asked Molly. "Glad you asked, young relative, or this would have been a short conversation. Now, stick with me like shoe gum. This bit about crossing the Amazon seems clear enough." "Crystal," Molly agreed. "We just don't know whether to go south or west." "Well, we're supposed to follow the Incans, quote, to the end of the world, end quote. Are you still with me?" "Sure." "And the Incas believed the Pacific Ocean was the end of the world." "Okay," said Molly. "So I think we cut across the Amazon rainforest to Ecuador, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and then we look for this castle." The team silently considered this. Finally, Guadalupe burst out a gale of churros, spitting with laughter. "Across the Amazon just like that?" She stood up so she could gesture to the distant jungle. "What about the fire ants, the crocodiles, the jaguars? What about the poachers, the Maloko tribesmen, the cartel smugglers? What about the hundreds of species of snakes?" She worked herself up to a shout. "There are frogs that can kill you in the Amazon." It's a big problem. You can't just cross the Amazon like you're crossing the street. You won't last an hour. She's right, said Raj. On average, every year, 36 hikers go into the Amazon and never come out. Raj, why do you even know these things? Asked Molly. Addison studied Guadalupe. She was older than he was and a few inches taller. Her head was wrapped in a bandana like a swashbuckling pirate, and she kept one hand cocked confidently on her hip. Addison could see from her worn gypsy clothes, tattered at the ankles, that she'd seen more than a few adventures in her life. What do you suggest, Guadalupe? This is my country, and I'm an expert in the Amazon. Guadalupe set both of her hands on her hips, her bracelets tinkling. I will be your guide. I thought you said you were from Cleveland, said Eddie. Teddy Roosevelt was from Manhattan, Guadalupe returned, but he's still one of the world's most famous Amazonian explorers. Addison considered Guadalupe's line of reasoning. We're not paying you this time. Eddie was beside himself. Addison, you're not honestly considering this, are you? The last time you hired her to be our guide, she stole your wallet. Guadalupe shrugged. I will be your guide for free. You saved me from the policia tonight, so I owe you. Besides, I've been thinking about a change of scenery from Olvidados. Naturally, said Eddie, the policia probably have a price on your head. Won't anybody miss you? Asked Molly. What about your parents? I haven't got any, Guadalupe shrugged again. Molly and I are running low on family members too, said Addison. Sometimes I wish I didn't have 3 sisters, Raj put in, hoping to add to the conversation. Addison, Eddie said desperately, you're not hiring her. Seriously. I don't see what choice we have, said Addison. I don't have any money, and she's the only guide who will work for free. She's a professional thief. We can't trust her, Eddie pleaded. You can't survive the Amazon without me, said Guadalupe. It's a deal, said Addison. Welcome aboard. And that is the end of chapter 10. Do me a favor, if you're watching these videos and you have any suggestions, please leave a comment down below. Also, I got a new phone that allows me to take longer videos, so I'm reading entire chapters at once. Let me know if you prefer all of the chapter in one video or if you like it broken up in about 10-minute chunks. Thank you so much. Have a great day, you guys. Bye.